We're back for another edition of the Half Court Press podcast. I'm John Nyatawa, joined by Sam McKewon, here to talk some local hoops. Creighton in Nebraska. The Jays have been off for a week and don't return to action until Saturday. That's a couple days away from when we're recording this podcast. Sam, your team, Nebraska, the team you cover, Nebraska.
Yeah.
I don't know if you want to claim the Huskers at the moment, but they're coming off a disappointing showing against Ohio State. 90-54 was the final on Wednesday, a day ago. So we'll start with them since that's the most recent game we have between these two teams, and it wasn't good. What was your reaction?
My first reaction is this is a year where I think Nebraska and Creighton would have loved to have switched leagues. I know Creighton loves the Big East, but how could Creighton not want to compete in the Big Ten this year? I mean, every team just kicks a lot of ass. I mean, there are so many good players in the Big Ten right now. And Nebraska, so some of what's going on at Nebraska is defined by the competition. Yeah. And Creighton can handle that right now. They could go beat Michigan on Christmas Day. I think Nebraska, which actually played well against Michigan on Christmas, doesn't quite have the juice. And then when they came off a game that I think they really put a lot into winning and thought they could have won if they hadn't screwed up late in the game, I think they just kind of hit a wall against Ohio State. It just wasn't they had some shots not fall early that were pretty good looks. They're on the road. I think they had practiced fairly hard, but I also think that Hoiberg is starting to see that his players don't necessarily have a ton to do, and so they're just coming into the gym and they're maybe not off their legs enough. Like they're not, they're weary. They're a little leg weary and just maybe a little weary of trying to put a basketball through the hoop. And sometimes, and you know this as a writer and as a podcaster, John, you have to hold on to the words you write or the words you speak because you want to make sure that you keep them for a time when it counts, And I think Nebraska is a little worn out, and I think you saw that Wednesday night. That's not to make any excuses. A 36-point loss is the worst in Fred Hoiberg's playing and coaching career. So that was rough. But I think you're seeing a team that's a little weary, a little worn out, and they played a really physical team in Ohio State. It wasn't a finesse squad. And Michigan's a little finesse. They're good, and I think they're actually a little bit better than Ohio State, but they're not going to beat you up. Well, Ohio State beat them up, and especially on, the offensive boards, and, they shove and they push, and, Nebraska tried driving into the lane, and Ohio State was there to strip at it every single time. And I just think Nebraska hadn't played a team like that this year. And I think they kind of got punched in the mouth, and they took it. They kind of looked at the blood coming out of their mouth, and they didn't have an answer. And when you don't have enough answers in a league like this and you're in this grind, what happened can happen. And it was bad, man. It went from 13-13, which was at the 13-15 mark, to 70-29. So Ohio State went on a 57-16 run over the course of about 23 minutes of clock time. So it wasn't like 37, the last 37 minutes of the game. No, it was almost like a half. 13-15 to 9:44 of, I think the second half is 70-20. It was 57-16. And that's just, Ohio State could have picked its score if they wanted. And I think that, to me, is a team that's been run through and is just weary and tired. That's what I saw.
Right, and that may be the case. And one of the things about Ohio State is they'll expose that factor, especially when you're talking about the way they play.
It's too bad Creighton didn't get to play them. I know they probably were supposed to, but
Ohio State?
Yeah.
That was one of the teams. I mean, they played them in the Gavitt games recently, but they had a Big Ten home game, so it could have been Ohio State, it could have been Iowa, could have been Michigan State. Anyway, but yeah, like we've seen Chris Holtman's defense against Greg McDermott's offense, though, when yes. Holtman was at Butler. And one of the things that, like, when I watched those games, one of the reasons why Creighton had some success against Holtman was thought the Jays were always really committed to moving the ball. If you got a decent look, cool. Let's keep it moving until we get a good look, and then turn that good look into a great look. So that Creighton was like really committed to just focusing on working on offense, like knowing that, hey, we're going to have to. It might take longer than we're comfortable with, but we're going to have to really move the ball and move this defense around to get a great shot. And that's one of the issues that Nebraska's facing, is trying to find that little extra, whether it's the extra pass, the extra pass. And one of the things that I always enjoy listening to Greg McDermott talk offense, because obviously he's one of the best in the game at it. He talks a lot about, maybe you have a mismatch, but it's not necessarily advantageous to attack that mismatch without first reversing the ball and getting a scenario where if I'm a guard and a big man is guarding me, wait until that big man has to close out and try to take away my 3-point shot, then drive him, as opposed to sort of like backing out and dribbling and letting, sort of sizing up the big man, and he's kind of getting in his defensive stance, and he can kind of find a way to stay in front. Well, make him move first, and then go at him. And I feel like those are the types of like little things that I just feel like Nebraska hasn't found yet. Working together as a unit instead of saying like, oh, let's just go. I got this mismatch. Let me go. Or I have this window to the lane. I'm going to go all the way to the rim, instead of let's go 3/4 of the way, stop, kick it back out, let my teammate then attack a bad closeout or shoot the jump shot. So it's interesting, Sam. I thought that you'd see Nebraska maybe be a little bit more advanced in its sort of sophistication offensively in year 2 under Fred Hoiberg, but I guess I probably just underestimated the impact of new guys and a new team and players coming out of a redshirt year and having to figure this out on the fly against elite competition, as you mentioned, with the Big Ten being the depth is incredible in that league. So it was, obviously, if you're a Husker fan, it's really disappointing to watch. And I feel like a lot of fans are probably just like I'm ready to just throw my hands up. I'm done with this team. But I am interested to see, because I know what Hoiberg has done, what his track record is. His teams were always notorious for sharing the ball and creating good looks, or turning good looks into great looks. And I just think the more time he has with this group, I got to imagine you're going to see improvement. He's got too much. There's too much evidence in his past to suggest otherwise. So disappointing game, but now where do they go from here? That to me is what I'm curious. So I want to see how much growth they can get with this group.
Well, I think maybe they need the return of Derek Walker, and that's not, that you don't want to put anything on that in the presumption that they're going to start winning games when a guy that was, like a bench player at Tennessee comes back. But as it stands right now, Nebraska really doesn't have a low post threat. And in the sense that, okay, you can live without that if you've got a bunch of elite guards who can shoot. But, Ivan Ouedraogo is actually playing pretty well. He's just limited in what he can do as a scorer. And so...
yeah, no rim pressure. Right. They don't...
The only rim pressure is Delano Banton driving to the hoop, or Teddy Allen doing one of his angular, things that he does, which are cool. But you can do that about 3 times in a game. Like, there's no anchoring presence down there. And Eduardo Andre's not ready physically. He's coming off COVID, and he's a true freshman, and he's played 4 years of basketball. And so Derek Walker really probably will help them to anchor themselves and to really sit into who they are as a team. But, and then you've got the issue of, they really are missing a lot of shots. They're shooting 30% from 3-point range, and not all of those shots are bad looks. I think it's gotten to the point where Thor is hitting 21.4% of his threes, and Lat Mayen is hitting 25%. And Lat's the guy that, they talked up in the preseason is,
right.
We did the 100-shot drill and he hit 89 of them. And that's the guy that they probably need to dial the workload back a little bit in practice, because I think they're feeling like he's just overworking. And I don't think these guys have a lot to do. They're in COVID protocol. So they can't really go anywhere. They can't hang out and go, they can't really get away from it. And so I think their choice between staring at the four walls inside their house and going to the gym is going to the gym. But I think you can actually shoot yourself out of things. I mean, you can actually shoot yourself into a slump, because if your best 2 hours of the week were spent at 11 p.m. at the gym and you hit 14 in a row, sometimes you want to keep some of that energy in those legs for the game. So I think a few of these guys have worked too hard, which is kind of goofy. And then I'm not sure that Fred ever had a player like Teddy Allen at Iowa State. People always say, well, what about Royce White? But I think Royce was a better player, and he was a better passer.
Yeah.
And I think I'm not knocking Teddy here. They brought him on. They brought him into the program. That's on. Nebraska made that choice. Teddy's a high major college basketball player. There's no question about that. He's the best player on the team. Either him or Banton is. But is he a great fit for what Nebraska does? Well, he has 13 assists on the season, so you tell me. 13 assists in 10 games. That's, what? You tell me, John.
Royce White was a phenomenal passer.
Yeah.
He was.
I don't want to use that guy. The only reason I bring that name up is because Royce had a past off the court.
Gotcha.
But on the court, they weren't the same player. They're just not the same.
Yeah. Well, he kind of was a centerpiece, and Allen is the centerpiece now. So I get the idea. No, man, I think that's just the issue that's going through the team. It's just trying to figure out a way to get the ball moving, and offensively. And your point about the rim pressure is a big one. Getting easy shots opens things up, and it makes those 3-pointers seem there's less pressure on you to feel like you got to hit that, because hey, well, we'll just get something inside easy if this doesn't go in. So
just for example, Creighton has obviously Zagorowski has 45 assists, but Creighton has Damian Jefferson has 28, Ballock has 23, Antoine Jones has 19, Denzel Mahoney has 15, and Sharif Missile has 15 assists. Okay? Now let me tell you about Nebraska. Delano Banton has 47, and the next guy is got 14. And that's Thor and Kobe. That tells you a lot right there. It's Banton has so much pressure on him to do all the assisting, so to speak, and Nebraska's played, so we're clear, one more game than Creighton. So Nebraska has 129 assists. Creighton has 160 in 9 games. So, I think they're just working through that stuff, and I'm not sure Nebraska fans love it when I compare the two programs, because they're not in the same place. They're just not. Maybe 5 years from now they will be, but I think that underlines Hoiberg and McDermott's offenses are similar enough in some ways that they're ultimately looking for the same kinds of things.
Yes.
And I think Hoiberg would look at Creighton's team and go, I'll go coach those guys. They're fine, And I think McDermott would probably look at Nebraska's team right now and go, yeah, that probably wouldn't be the team I'd coach. I'd probably recruit it a little differently. So that's kind of where it's at.
It's hard to not compare a little bit, just because statistically it might look different on the court, because there's just a different brand of player that Hoiberg's going off after versus who Greg McDermott goes after. But when you lay it all out statistically at the end of the day, it's going to look very similar when Hoiberg has it going offensively as compared to what McDermott has with Creighton right now. So it's hard to not just sort of peek at the template, which Creighton has, the blueprint, and say, all right, this is where Nebraska is deficient, or this is where it needs to, to rise. So I get, yeah. It's just like you said, it's a ways off. And well, Fred Hoiberg put this roster together with obviously the assistance of Matt Abdul-Masih. So you can't really complain about not having the personnel. You brought this person. You overhauled the whole program to get the type of players in that you wanted, and it just hasn't gone well. And it's going to be really tough this year, obviously, with how good this league is. I mean, even Northwestern, man, like you thought Northwestern would be a team that you could steal a win from.
Oh, yeah. Well, Northwestern, I watched them play Iowa and Ohio State, and, if Northwestern's hitting shots, which they did against both teams, they're going to be tough. They don't play great defense, but, yeah, the league's unbelievable. I mean, Michigan State's 0-3, and a legit 0-3, not like some BS, they lost on flukes. I mean, they got their butts kicked by Northwestern and Minnesota. Those games were close. So, and
even Wisconsin took it.
Struggles is evidence of how good the league is, because Michigan State is not rolling a crap team out there, and they're still getting rolled.
And that's who Nebraska has next on Saturday. It's Michigan State.
Bad time to get them.
Right. On a 3-game losing streak.
Mm-hmm.
And now you got to play the Spartans. So we'll see how it goes. And I mean, it's not going to be,
probably
easy.
Not well. I will say this. They got Michigan at the right time. Michigan hadn't played in 12 days on Christmas night. That's the time to go get a win. I mean, Nebraska had all of the chips in their favor there. They had played 2 games in a week. Michigan hadn't played in 12 days or something. And then Michigan comes in with like 25 guys. And I'm not kidding you. They put out 29 chairs, John. And I'm like, who are all these guys? How many coaches do they have? They had like 12 guys on the bench who were coaching or something. And then they had like
NBA style, man. Juwan Howard, man. He's got the NBA.
Serious. And he's pretty cool and collected on the sideline. Like, he's not, he'll call out a play, but he's pretty relaxed. And I'm watching Juwan Howard. I'm like, I must have watched 60 games of this guy in college. But he's got it set up to where his bench, the guys that never even take off the warm-up jerseys, they all stand and they're like a bench mob. And I'm like, that's smart. That's smart. And they affected the game, I think.
Did they? Yeah.
But that was Juwan Howard coaching, because that wouldn't have been something that those kids would have necessarily thought of themselves. But they had 30 dudes over there. And Nebraska didn't have that many. They have like 20. And honestly, I think on Christmas, they seemed less jazzed about it. And that piece, I think, has to change. I thought they could have stole one against Michigan. And then I thought last night was going to be hard. And I don't like going into Michigan State. That one's going to be tough, because Michigan State's going to be hungry as hell. And they're going to watch the Ohio State tape and go, we're going to beat them up. And then eventually they'll roll in. But anyway, that's the Nebraska side of it. How's Creighton doing?
Well, I think that they feel like they're in a pretty good place after having a week off and allowing themselves to sort of mentally reset after 6 games in 16 days.
Yeah.
So I think that it took a toll physically, but I think the bigger toll was mentally, just sort of being isolated and having to test, and I mean all the things that we've talked about repeatedly and that athletes are dealing with, particularly in college.
Mm-hmm.
So that was wearing on the guys, and they needed time off. So some of them went home, some of them brought family in, but they had 3 days off to celebrate Christmas and take a break. But now they're back at it, and we'll see. They've had some practice time to devote to themselves to kind of work on a few things. So one of the things Coach McDermott mentioned was pace,
mm-hmm.
and being a little bit more efficient and aggressive in transition, which is kind of one of their staples, obviously, but they haven't been as potent there this year. And so they haven't, I guess that's one of the things that when you play 6 games in 16 days, you don't have a lot of opportunities to just sit there and practice and work on some of the things where you're lacking,
mm-hmm.
Because you're constantly in game prep mode. So that's what these couple of practices ahead of Providence on Saturday have afforded that opportunity to Creighton to work on some of those things. But I don't know, man, when Creighton's winning games where it's shooting 40% and 35%, like the Jays are going to feel really good about that. Like if they've out rebounded 3 Big East teams in a row. They've won a rebounding game in 3 games in a row against Big East teams. That hasn't happened in 6 years. Just to have 3 straight like that, winning games where I think I want to say it was either the 8th or the 9th game in McDermott's tenure when Creighton won a game despite shooting less than 40% when it beat Xavier. So that element of kind of showing some grit and tenacity and finding, hustling your way to rebounds, winning those 50-50 ball battles, just figuring that out to sort of like grit your teeth and get a key defensive stop when the game momentum's kind of teetering. You can just sort of sense it and, hey, this is an important possession. We got to get a stop. That was one of the things, like in that Xavier game, I think in the final, what was it, 3 or 4 minutes or so, Xavier had the ball down in a one possession game. So Xavier has the ball, one possession game. What happens? And it was 3 different instances of that, and Creighton got to stop each time. So that's crucial stuff right there. That it analytically
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. Right. So they're excited about that. I think just their ability to turn it on defensively when they know that they need to, and then obviously they hope they can get their offense going.
Yeah. So. Winning rock fights, which in the NCAA tournament you have to usually win 1 or 2 of those.
Yeah. Exactly. And in Big East play, you got to win probably to win a title. Probably got to win 4 or 5 of them, maybe. So, and they lost a shootout already to Marquette. That's not normally typical of what Creighton does. But I think of last year, they were in a shootout with Georgetown on the road. They lost that, but they won every other game that sort of favored them stylistically, and then they won a couple grinders that they needed to sort of eke out and find a way to win late in the year. Marquette on the road was big, and even the Seton Hall game at home was a really like slow paced sort of drag out street fight type game until like the final 5 or 6 minutes when Creighton went wild and made every shot and extended the lead to double digits. But before that, it was a grinder, and the Jays, they did enough to win that. So they've got that in their makeup, and I think that's really encouraging for this group because they know that if they can get their offense going and they hit stretches where they streak and surge and start pouring in like 20 points in 12 possessions or something like that, then they can really separate themselves and get some easy wins. So we'll see what they do against Providence. Providence has notoriously made it tough on Creighton to settle in, to find a rhythm offensively. Last year, I thought it was actually the other end of the floor where what stood out to me more was Providence just giving Creighton a lot of issues defensively with the way it runs its offense, because it's got guys that can attack down low, and it's hard to defend Providence one-on-one. They just clog the paint, and you have to in turn clog the paint, and then that leaves open jump shots. And Providence isn't a great shooting team, but if you give even an average shooting team open looks, you can get burned. And Creighton got burned last year against the Friars. They shot like 48% from 3 in 2 games against Creighton. And we're talking a ton of threes. I think they made 12 in one game and 13 in another game. I mean, it was or maybe it was 12 and 11 or something like that. It was a large number of threes that Providence hit against Creighton. And obviously Creighton survived with a last-second shot from Marcus Zagorowski in the first one last year and lost by double digits at Providence. So it's gonna be a tough matchup for the Jays on Saturday, but it's an important one because both teams are 3-1. Seton Hall's kind of emerging as a top half contender in the Big East at 4-1. Villanova hasn't lost yet. UConn feels like a team that's going to be in the top half. Like if you're Creighton, you don't want to drop games to teams that maybe won't be there. I think Providence probably will, but it's important to stay with these guys. Like if Seton Hall's 4-1, you want to be 4-1. Villanova's 4-0, you want to be right there with them. So even early in the year, the race is on.
So it's about Villanova in it. As well it should be, right? Like that's what counts is I mean they're the they're the best program in the league or the treadmill program, whatever. But yeah, I suspect like as time goes on, like let's just say 7 years from now, you're covering this team and you look back and say, okay, over the first, I don't know, 12, 13 years of the league, what is Creighton's record at Providence? And it's going to be 7-6.
Right.
It's or 8-5. It's, DePaul. Have they lost it to DePaul yet since they joined the Big East? I don't even know.
Oh man, that's a good question. I feel like they might have at the start, maybe not. Sam,
There's going to be games where like there's going to be series where maybe like DePaul, like St. John's until St. John's figures it out, or you can go win and with consistency. But I think and then there's going to be ones where you're like, if we won 2 games in 10 years, we've done something, and that's Villanova, or for some programs that's Creighton. And then there's those games in the middle where the difference between a good season and a great season will be: did you win at Providence? Did you win at Connecticut? Did you win at Butler? And Creighton's kind of been hot and cold at Butler over the years. I don't think I don't think Creighton will ever apologize for beating Connecticut at Connecticut. I know that that's not the same program it was, I don't know, 8 years ago or something. But anytime you can go there and win a game, it should feel like you did something significant. And so I know I watched that game more than the Xavier one. And, I mean, I think a 2-point win is just fine coming out of there.
Yeah, no matter how you get it. Even if you have more turnovers than assists, and there's scoring droughts, and I think Creighton might have missed, gosh, Sam, what was it, like 3 of 18 from 3 after halftime or something like that? Maybe missed its final 11 threes.
Right.
And a lot of those were good looks, but you got the win. And you got lucky a little bit because that RJ Cole from UConn missed those 2 free throws with 10 seconds left in regulation to give the opportunity for Creighton to tie the game and force overtime. But still, the Jays were, they executed well enough and did a lot of the little things in that game. And against Xavier, too, did a lot of the little things. It's interesting watching Creighton, and especially match up against some other teams that are still maybe finding themselves or maybe a little bit less experienced. You just see moments in games where what Creighton has practiced clearly is being translated to the floor. Whether it's Mitch Ballick rotating over and, jumping straight up with that verticality. They run those verticality drills all the time in practice. So doing that, they got a key lob pass to Christian Bishop in that overtime against UConn. Mm-hmm. Just their connectivity and being in the right spot against Xavier defensively and finding their way to defensive rebounds. You saw bodies on bodies, then like Marcus Zagorowski flying in to grab a defensive board. Like that's exactly how they draw it up. Mm-hmm. You guys clear out these big dudes, and then we'll let our guards come and grab these boards. And that's what happened late in the game against Xavier. So they're doing a lot of the things they want to do. It's just the shots aren't falling as consistently as they have been over the last couple of years. And Greg McDermott said he's not worried about it. Like they've got good shot selection. So players like Marcus Zagorowski, Mitch Ballick have the track record. They're going to knock these down when they get them. So when they do, Creighton, rises to that upper echelon. At this, against UConn and Xavier, when those shots weren't falling, Creighton a little vulnerable, but it found a way to get it done. When those threes start hitting and they start going consistent, that was one of the things about this team last year, Sam, is like they didn't have a lot of off shooting nights.
Right. They had a lot of great shooters. I mean, they had even more last year than they do this year.
Right. They were just consistent with it, So they were somewhere in that 35 to 45 range from 3-point land, every game, it seemed like. And so if they can get back to that, which it's possible, because Denzel Mahodi's shooting 40% so far, and Mitch Ballick and Marcus Zagorowski are career 40% 3-point shooters. Damian Jefferson has improved his jump shot from long range as well. So they definitely can get there, but they haven't been there yet. And so it's kind of we'll see what they can do.
Mahoney ranks up there as one of the greatest transfer pickups in Creighton history. I mean, that's not one that
especially in terms of saying, like, how did you find this dude? Or like, he's from SEMO, like,
yeah,
who would have thought that this guy fits what you do? He had good numbers. I'm not saying that he's not a good player or he wasn't a good player there, but it's just like, it just seems like so random. Oh, wow, Denzel Mahoney. Marcus Foster made a ton of sense. Creighton recruited him out of high school. He was down to Creighton, Kansas State. He chose Kansas State, wanted to play in the Big 12. Well, Creighton goes to the Big East. Things don't work out at K-State. Boom, he's over at Creighton. Like, a lot of those stories make sense, but Denzel, it's like, what? This dude, and I mean, yeah, he's been an impact player on both sides of the ball so far this year. He's probably been their best player. Like, he's their MVP so far with what he's done defensively and, the plays that he's made late in games on offense. Like, he was critical in overtime against UConn and against Xavier. He had that big and one when it was a 1-point game and stretched it to 4. Against Kansas, obviously, Creighton didn't win that game, but he willed them back into it when it looked like it was done in the final 90 seconds or whatever. So he's been huge for him. And he's such a different player, Sam, because, like, he is really long and he's strong, but he doesn't, like, he's not going to dunk on you, and he's not going to blow by you with an huge, an explosive first step or something. But he's really clever in how he can get downhill and get find an open window for jump shots. And he's got a lot of confidence. So
does Damian Jefferson. And I know how they got him, right? I mean, I know how they got him, but I think what's interesting about Creighton is the way that they put their roster together, the players that they get, and the way that those pieces fit together is what I think when you watch Creighton and then you kind of learn the backstory of how they got the players, you realize that roster management and recruiting and those things are much bigger part of coaching than what happens on game day. And not that game day isn't important, and not that McDermott hasn't had good or bad games on game day. I mean, there's something to be said, and it's more true in football than it is in basketball. But roster management's really important, and it's something that Creighton does really well. Like, that's where I think they get their edge, is that if you told me that, well, the top 7 players on this team are a kid from Lawrence, Kansas, a kid from Kansas City, a transfer from SEMO, a transfer from New Mexico. Zagorowski's from Massachusetts. Okay, yep. So Marcus Zagorowski makes sense why he's good. He's always been good, but wasn't the number one guy. A transfer from, where's Antoine Jones from again?
Memphis.
And then a center from St. Louis. I don't think you're telling me that's the top 15 team, but it is. Like, if you just gave me those broad descriptions, I wouldn't necessarily say that that's what that team is, but it is. And it's not just because the sum are greater than the parts. The parts are really good. And that's how they do it. Like, it's a secret sauce that they figured out how to put together a roster. And, Hoiberg had that at Iowa State. He really did. I mean, you can disassemble his rosters and say, I mean, there's NBA players on it, but there were role players that were elite too, and perfect fits. And I think that's the thing for Hoiberg and Abdelmassih at Nebraska, is they're still working on that, the sum greater than the part stuff, where do you have all the right pieces? And that's the piece where Creighton, they got Doug, and they had the Doug era that bled over into the Big East. And then they had those couple down years where they obviously didn't have good enough players to compete. And then they found a way to find them again. And that's what Nebraska's on that developmental scale. I mean, they just have to find the right pieces. And Damian Jefferson 3 years ago isn't Damian Jefferson now. He's a way better player now. Right. So, that's where Nebraska is in the developmental process. And like, again, you hope that 3 years from now, when all the pieces start to fall into place for Nebraska, it looks the way Creighton has done it, where you don't necessarily have a bunch of 5-stars, although Nebraska will have at least one, but you have players who complement each other. And right now, the complementary piece just doesn't seem to be there.
All right, before we go, Sam, you brought up an interesting Denzel Mahoney, best transfer in the McDermott era. You ready to go that far? Because they got Mo Watson, Marcus Foster, Echenike.
Yeah, I wouldn't say Echenike. I mean, it kind of depends on where they go from here. Watson was a unique player who unfortunately got hurt.
If Watson completes his career, he's the best transfer addition probably in Creighton history.
Yes, I agree with that. I would put now, Marcus Foster may be a better individual player than Mahoney, but I think if you look at the way Mahoney fits into what they're doing now, Foster, Foster is a little bit like Teddy in the sense that when you add a player like that, part of your energy and your bandwidth as a team goes to letting them do whatever the hell they're going to do.
Yeah.
Marcus Foster did that. Like he would dribble, step back, 3, hit it. And that's fine, and he made the shot, but it's again, when you're adding players like that, and then when they got in the tournament, so
well, yeah, what happened when he didn't have it? No,
yeah.
and
so that kind of thing.
I do think they have had to train some of that out of Denzel, honestly, and he's been open to it. Obviously,
right.
he sees what the blueprint is and how it works. But he was the ball dominant, top scoring option,
right,
at SEMO, and came to Creighton and had to sort of fit himself into the puzzle. And I think he's still finding that a little bit, but it seems to be a little bit of a more natural transition. And honestly, with Marcus Foster, like he had to learn it too. And toward the end of his senior year, I thought he had kind of settled in, but they certainly didn't have. They were a lot more reliant on him scoring the ball than this Creighton team is on Denzel Mahoney scoring. The ways that he can impact the game in other facets, particularly on defense, and his ability to rebound and set guys up. Yeah.
We'll talk about this another day, but obviously Doug has earned the designation as the best player in his father's coaching era. I mean, he's earned that. Number 2 is tricky, and it certainly isn't the guy that got picked in the NBA draft. No offense to him, but it's not Justin Patton. So we'll have to talk about that.
I have to see how this season
rank in the top 5, and that's not Patton's fault. He was only there for 1 year, but
yeah. We have to see how this season plays out.
Because Doug's number 1, and Doug deserves number 1. But
right.
And as a transfer piece, I think what Grant Gibbs added to the program in both his on-court play and also the chemistry piece with him was important. I think he brought some good things out in people. So Grant was an important transfer, even if there were games where he didn't play or, he wasn't quite the same player he probably was in high school. Gibbs just added a little extra element to the point where Doug was willing to give up his own scholarship to keep Grant. So.
Well, and I feel like a guy like Marcus Zagorowski has that same sort of intangible. He's left the program or impacted the program from an intangible standpoint in that similar way that Gibbs had. And Marcus has obviously the stats to sort of back up his impact of this is the type of player he is. But behind the scenes, his work ethic, his competitiveness, just his sort of, I want to grind and prove myself, chip on the shoulder type thing, that has filtered into the rest of the team. And when his career is done, whenever that is, when we have an opportunity to sort of reassess that, I think you're going to see that have a pretty profound impact on the rise of Creighton or whatever Creighton accomplished in his tenure and
right.
sort of arc of where the Jays are in the Big East and under Coach McDermott. Like Marcus Zagorowski's impact strictly as from a personality standpoint, similar to kind of how you're talking about Grant Gibbs, the way that he just affected things, and from a chemistry standpoint, and he was a beloved player, not just on the team, but among the fan base. And I feel like Marcus has a similar sort of impact in a different way, but a similar impact. But all right, Sam, we've talked long enough about some hoops. We'll be back soon, I'm sure, to break down the latest in the seasons of Nebraska and Creighton. We'll see if the Huskers can steal a win against one of the many. What are they at? Are they about to play like 8 ranked teams in a row or something like that? I don't even know. I haven't. No, I know they have Purdue in there.
The streak will end with after this one because they're going to play Purdue, and Purdue's another game where I think Nebraska. We'll see on Saturday. If Michigan State lays an egg like it has been, then Nebraska absolutely can win that game.
Yeah.
We'll just have to see if Nebraska is ready to punch with a team that's probably going to punch. But they can beat Purdue. I mean, Purdue is they're a grinder team too, but on the right night, Nebraska can beat that team. They have one really, really good player, and Derek Walker will be available to guard Travion Williams. So we'll see. We'll see what happens.
Yes, we will. Derek Walker returns for
Purdue.
Okay. So one more game. Right. And the Jays are going to play. So they're entering the grind of the Big East schedule where they're basically playing Saturday, Wednesday, with maybe one bye week in there or bye day in there in January. So we're going to learn a lot about Creighton and really the Big East as a whole over the next month or so. So eager to find that out. Sam, thanks for your time.
Thank you.
Again, thanks for listening. We'll be back soon.